Hello, my name's Ethan. Make sure to check out my website, ethanwrenn.com, where you can find links to all my various socials. We are currently live. You could be here too. Hit that follow and subscribe button. You'll be notified when I go live next. On my website, I have a blog. From there, you could learn about investing, technology, gaming, fashion, different types of hype releases that you can resell potentially. Just a bunch of things we cover in the Discord. Make sure to join the Discord as well. Here's an example of what one of the blog posts may look like. And as you scroll through, this particular blog post is about a electronically traded product we've covered here on stream before, and you can get more in-depth information such as the top holdings and learn more about the companies that make up the top holdings of this fund. Every blog post also has its own unique video that goes along with it, and at the very bottom, you're even able to leave comments. Give me feedback, let me know what you guys think, how I can improve. I'd really appreciate it. On the bottom right-hand corner of every page of the website, on both desktop and mobile, you'll see a Discord icon. If you click it, you basically have access to the Discord in its entirety without making an account, without downloading anything. You're able to scroll through and check out what we've been talking about in the top left corner. You click it, you can go through the various channels. If you see something you like, you can click it. There's an Open Original button, and it will pull up the image in a new tab in its full size so you can more clearly see it. So, on top of that, if you come to my YouTube channel, something I just want to comment on is we have this playlist category. So go to my YouTube channel, click playlist, and you'll see a bunch of different playlists I've made to organize my content. Let's say you're really interested in ETFs, you can click the ETF playlist. Or maybe you want to learn more about the different technical indicators you so often hear me talk about in these videos. You can watch the technical indicators playlist, commodities, crypto, international investing. These are all things I'd consider you watch, and I'd really appreciate your time. So what's the next thing we're going to be watching today? Over here we have How Tax Breaks Help the Rich from Vox. Let's see what they have to say.
Has a problem with income inequality.
Things are much worse today in terms of inequality than they were 30 years ago.
The biggest threat to us as a nation is income inequality.
People have different ideas about why this is happening.
CEO pay climbs every single year without exception.
The United States has lost 5 million manufacturing jobs since the year 2000.
Big shifts that's happened in the economy that has led in part to a decline in union membership.
But one of the biggest drivers of inequality is hiding here in these 2,000 pages. It's the U.S. tax code. President Trump and Republicans in Congress have a plan to alter that code. And if they get their way, it'll get even better for the richest Americans. First, let's look at a few things that Trump and the Republicans don't want to change about the tax code: the charitable deduction and the mortgage interest deduction. Here's how they favor the rich. Let's say Dan makes a $100 donation to his church. He makes about $30,000 a year, roughly the median income for individuals in the US, which puts him in the 15% tax bracket. It means he would save, at most, $15 on his taxes. But let's say Dan's boss, Steve, makes the same donation to his church. Steve makes $500,000 a year, which puts him in the top tax bracket. And the same $100 donation could save Steve $39.60 on his taxes. Dan and Steve give the same amount to their church, but Steve saves more than twice as much. The higher your tax rate, the more the charitable deduction helps you. Small examples like this add up. People making $100,000 or more account for about 57% of all the charitable contributions in the US, but they get 76% of the tax benefits. This deduction is also really expensive. The US spends $70 billion a year on it, more than 8 times what it spends on Head Start, the federally funded preschool program, and more than twice what it spends on Pell Grants for low-income students to go to college. Plus, there's all kinds of ways to bend the rules. Billionaire Mitchell Rales gets a tax break for donating his collection of modern art to a museum that he built right next door to his house, a museum that
It's kind of crazy. You so often see like 501(c)s or like these charity. Anyone can start like a nonprofit, right? Anyone can start a nonprofit. You'll so often see potentially rich individuals or even moderately well-off people start a 501(c), and then all the money that they would have been paying to taxes is now being donated to this nonprofit who's, being operated by their cousin, who's the manager of this nonprofit, and then who's running an art gallery across your lake where you're just storing your art. It's just crazy, the types of things you see in the United States.
Only open for private tours. But the worst thing about the charitable deduction? There's not great evidence that it works.
Turns out you don't need a tax break to encourage people to be generous to others. In the 1980s, the top tax rate for the richest people was 70%, and through a series of reforms, it dropped to 28%. And the Council on Foundations, is kind of the trade group for charities, said,
I do think a 78% tax rate for anyone's insane. I think we can all agree with that, regardless of how much you hate the rich.
oh my God, you do that, we're going to lose all our contributions. Guess what? No difference. People gave just as much with a much lower tax rate.
Austria, Finland, Ireland, Italy, Sweden, Switzerland, and New Zealand have all gotten rid of their deductions for charitable contributions, and that hasn't had an impact on donation rates. One easy way to make things more fair? Replace the tax deduction with a tax credit. If Dan and Steve both give $100 to their church, give them each a $15 tax credit. That's how they do it in Canada. A tax credit reduces the amount you owe, so the same donation gets the same benefit, no matter how rich you are. There's another tax deduction that's a boon for the wealthy.
The mortgage interest deduction costs about $100 billion a year to the Treasury. We could use that money to treat wounded veterans, to build hospitals, to build highways, but instead we give it to rich homeowners.
Here's how it works. Let's say Dan buys a house for $100,000. He doesn't pay for that all at once. Each month he writes a check to the bank for $1,000. Let's say $800 goes to paying for the house, and the bank keeps $200. That's interest. Dan writes 12 of these checks a year, so he pays $2,400 a year in interest. The mortgage interest deduction lets Dan subtract that interest from his taxable income, which could save him as much as $362. Nice, thinks Dan. That is, until he hears about Steve. Steve also buys a house for $100,000. He also writes a $1,000 check each month, paying $200 in interest. So after a year, Steve can also deduct the $2,400 from his taxable income. But that same deduction can save Steve more than $960, nearly 3 times as much as Dan for the exact same mortgage payments. It doesn't stop there. Steve can buy a second home, deduct the interest, and save even more. Or he can get a mortgage for his yacht, count it as a second home, and deduct the interest. Sorry, Dan, your fishing boat doesn't count. There are deductions everywhere. The money you lose from gambling? Deduct it. Fancy business dinners? Yep. Money you put in a retirement account? That's
Money you lose from gambling? Deducted.
too. You can even deduct the fees you pay an accountant to help you find more deductions.
Money you pay me to help you make money? Deducted.
And while theoretically Dan could take advantage of these same deductions, the fact is people like Steve benefit a whole lot more. People who make about $400,000 a year or more make up about 5% of taxpayers, but they get more than half the benefits from these tax deductions. Now, there's a third part of the tax code that Trump and the Republicans want to keep, and it's even better for the richest Americans than all of these deductions: the preferred rate for capital gains. Here's how it works. According to the U.S. tax code, there are 2 different kinds of income.
Earned income is when you go to work and somebody pays you a salary or a wage, a paycheck. That's earned income. And we have a whole set of income tax rates for that income that go up to 39.6%.
This is where Dan and Steve's tax rates come from.
Unearned income means guys who trade paper, guys who sell stock or buy commodities and then sell it. Invest in real estate properties and then sell them. That's capital income, and we tax that at a lower rate.
Let's say Steve earns
That's us, guys. That's
$500,000
us.
a year as a surgeon, and Lori earns the same amount as a
I love lower rates on capital gains tax. I love lower gains on capital gain.
hedge fund manager. Even though their income is the same, Steve's tax rate is 39.6%, but Lori's tax rate is nearly half that, 23.8%. So Steve ends up with a much higher tax bill. This is why billionaire investor Warren Buffett pays a lower tax rate than his secretary. His money comes from capital gains, while hers comes from a salary.
Debbie works just as hard as I do, and she pays at twice the rate I pay.
Ronald Reagan thought the same thing.
Reagan had been a very high bracket taxpayer. In fact, he paid at the 90% rate in the 1950s. He was a movie star. His accountant kept telling him, well, sign these documents and that'll shift your income from labor to capital income. And Reagan saw that that was hokey. Why should that be?
Reagan's landmark 1986 tax bill taxed capital income and labor income at the same rate.
In theory, some of those loopholes were understandable, but in practice, they sometimes made it possible for millionaires to pay nothing, while a bus driver was paying 10% of his salary, and that's crazy.
People said, oh my God, you can't do that. Then nobody will invest. Investment will plummet. It didn't.
This chart shows the value of the S&P 500, a stock market metric that measures how well big businesses are doing. After Reagan raised the capital gains rate in 1986, businesses continued to prosper. Reagan's successors, George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton, also raised taxes on the wealthiest Americans. And the 1990s saw America's longest period of consecutive economic growth ever. But the changes that Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress want to make to the tax code look very different. While the Trump and GOP plans get rid of some deductions, neither gets rid of the charitable contribution or mortgage interest deductions. Both plans would lower taxes on capital income for people
I love lower taxes on capital income.
like Lori, the hedge fund manager. And both plans would reduce the number of tax brackets from 7 to 3 and cut the top tax rate, which would mean big tax savings for someone like Steve and minimal savings for working and middle-class people like Dan. Rather than working to reduce the growing gap between the richest Americans and everyone else, these new tax plans would make that gap even wider.
I think that was a great video that went into some of the details on just, how taxes work in the United States. I thought it was quite interesting to see how potentially two people who make the same charitable donations can receive different percent write-offs or based on that same amount being donated. That was quite interesting. It's also kind of interesting to see how potentially investors receive very favorable tax benefits as compared to someone working an average or labored job, right? So it's just a quite interesting, something to delve into. We do a lot of investing on this channel, so low capital gains tax is something we quite appreciate. I do like Canada's system for the charitable donations, how they get a tax credit instead. So based on the amount of money they donate to charity, regardless of your income, you get a credit for a write-off that's equal. I do kind of like that system. But with all that being said, again, this was from Vox. It's how tax breaks help the rich. I think we are actually going to end the stream there for today. Thank you guys so much for watching the stream. I really appreciate it. Again, my name's Ethan. I have a website, ethanwrenn.com. Make sure to go check it out. What did we learn in today's stream? Well, the utility sector is a very resilient sector. It's one that receives reoccurring regular income on essential services, whether it be electricity, whether it be home and heating, whether it be waste management. These are very essential services that the utility sector provides that most families can't really go without, which makes it really resilient. And even more importantly, less fundamentally, they're currently presenting a very great entry into a market that's been ramping and appreciating over the past year and just showing no signs of slowing down. We have European markets flying. We have Asian markets bouncing and heading to new one-year highs. We have the U.S. equities about to be setting new all-time highs. You already have some aspects of the U.S. economy setting new all-time highs. So things have been just doing extremely well. And if you're looking for a place to be allocating money now, if you've been a little cold-footed, you've been missing the wave so far because you just couldn't quite pull the trigger, I feel like the utilities sector very much provides that entry into a flourishing economy at this exact moment. So it's definitely something to be looking into now rather than later if you want to get in on the current run in the markets right now. With that all being said, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Check out the website, follow, subscribe. You'll get notified when we go live next. And thank you.